The audience is so fragmented now, and there's such a battle for ratings, and with so many cable outlets, it's hard to imagine that they're not somehow affected by the money they need to bring in. It's, I think, high time that we had a source for news, like the Real News Network, where you can just count on it not being influenced, because there's no way that it can be.
With recent warnings of potential terrorist attacks coming from U.S. authorities, civil liberty proponents are growing increasingly concerned about preparations the federal government is making for a potential emergency situation. As of October, a full Army brigade is on active duty within the United States to deal with civil unrest and crowd control. According to a late September Army Times article, the brigade will be under the control of Northern Command as a federal response force for natural or man-made emergencies, including terrorist attacks. The Real News spoke to American Freedom Project founder Bruce Fein to discuss the constitutional significance of this development.
The United States has had a long tradition of frowning on the use of the military for domestic law enforcement purposes, and that finds expression most vividly in what's known as the Posse Comitatus Act, passed in the late 1800s, which, generally speaking, makes it a crime to use the military for domestic law enforcement unless Congress has expressly authorized an exception to that prohibition. The most gaping hole created in the Act was the provision sponsored by Senator John Warner called the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2007. And it basically said Congress hereby creates an exception for Posse Comitatus anytime that the president says there's a terrorist incident, a natural disaster, and then this open-ended loophole or other condition that makes him conclude that state authorities are not sufficient to suppress insurrection, domestic violence, rebellion, or otherwise. So that statute now basically endows the president with authority in his own unilateral discretion to decide that he will use the military anytime he wishes for domestic law enforcement purposes, and this brigade or this combat unit is certainly prepared to do such implementation at the president's beck and call.
In May 2007, President Bush signed the National Security Presidential Directive 51. The unclassified portion of NSPD 51 states that in the event of catastrophic emergency, a cooperative effort among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the federal government, coordinated by the president, will replace normal governmental procedure.
Combined with the Posse Comitatus Act, and now having that look more like a relic than the rule against the military running the government, we have this National Security Directive 51 that is equally problematic. Number one, the greatest problem, it's not known to the American people, and after all, in a government by the people, of the people, for the people, the government has to tell the people what it's doing to know whether it has authorization to do so. Sovereignty is the people, not the government. But this directive purports to establish a regime that would take hold in the event of some kind of huge national disaster where you're trying to ensure a continuity of government when it's made impossible because of an attack for the Congress or the Supreme Court or even the President's cabinet to meet. This situation has never happened in the history of the United States. The Constitution does not contemplate any emergency other than an invasion or domestic rebellion whereby you could suspend habeas corpus. There's nothing in the Constitution that says we revert to a state of nature and the president then can become all branches to himself in the name of keeping the country alive. And this secret national security directive, and we don't know all of it because it remains classified, insinuates that it'll be the president opposed to the other two branches of government who will be the steward of the nation's sovereignty in the event of a crisis and would then direct other branches as to what their duties should be. And it's outrageous, in my judgment, that these ideas or plans for a continuity of government that would purport to have the force of law should occur in secret. Now, secret government is what you do in the old Soviet Union or in communist China, not the United States of America where the people rule.
Donate today and receive a new documentary film available to members of the Real News Network. The History of the National Security State with legendary author Gore Vidal. Bonus features of the DVD include an in-depth response to Vidal from ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who served under 7 U.S. presidents, an exclusive interview with Colin Powell's former Chief of Staff Larry Wilkerson, and an insightful interview with oil policy analyst Antonia Juhas.
The news magazine of the screen. Living glimpses of history in the making.
Hollywood and Washington is a symbiotic relationship. They both deal with illusions. Reality doesn't often play much of a part. I think I saw through the myth of the Cold War almost from the beginning. I was a Washington political kid from a political family. Roosevelt first had radio because he had this great speaking voice and everyone liked to hear. Truman proceeded to break every arrangement that Roosevelt had set up for a peaceful coexistence. And Truman thought that it would be a good idea. Why not just stay armed all the time? And then he devised the national security state. You've got to go up and swear allegiance to the United States or else you're a commie. I mean, we had imported fascism. We get Dwight Eisenhower, who said that we have this great military industrial complex. It is a dangerous thing. And he said this is going to change everything. And the way our country's governed, it's going to change us politically. Along comes Jack Kennedy, who wanted to make his mark, believed in the Cold War. But he said in this kind of politics, it is the appearance of things that matters. I think everybody should take a sober look at the world about us. The national security state still exists, only it isn't communism anymore, it's terrorism. This is the most serious thing that has happened in the history of the United States. Knowledge is power. We need an honest news system.
We need the real news.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the power's in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Make a tax-deductible donation now of at least $10 a month or a one-time give of at least $75. As a thank you for your support, we will send you the new documentary film, The History of the National Security State.